The diplomatic hall of Station Kepler 7 hummed with the low-frequency conversations of a dozen different species, each delegation clustered around their designated areas, like territorial animals marking their space. Ambassador Brenda Garner stood at the edge of the human section, her weathered hands folded behind her back as she observed the other representatives with the calculating gaze of someone who had spent 40 years reading faces, human and otherwise. The Thektai delegation dominated the center of the room, their crystalline exoskeletons catching and fracturing the overhead lighting into prismatic rainbows that danced across the polished floor. Each of the insectoid beings stood nearly 8 feet tall, their multiple arms gesturing in complex patterns that served as their primary form of communication. Their leader, High Arbiter Zakth, had made it abundantly clear through his translator that he considered this entire proceedings a formality. Humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, barely 3 centuries past their first crude attempts at faster-than-light travel. To the left, the Corvin pack circled their territory with predatory grace. Their wolf-like features and pack mentality had made them formidable warriors and equally formidable negotiators. Pack leader Grex had spent the morning demonstrating his species' superior reflexes by catching falling utensils before they could hit the ground, his yellow eyes never leaving the human delegation as he did so. The message was clear. Humans were slow, clumsy, inferior. The reptilian Seth clustered near the environmental controls, their scaled bodies requiring higher temperatures than most species found comfortable. Ambassador Garner had noticed how they deliberately positioned themselves to force other delegations to either endure the heat or concede ground. Their serpentine leader, Coil Speaker Vash, had a habit of letting his forked tongue taste the air whenever humans spoke, as if their very words carried an offensive odor. Even the normally diplomatic ethereal collective, beings of pure energy inhabiting crystalline shells, had made their position clear. Their harmonious tones had described humans as temporally insignificant and lacking in the wisdom that comes with true age. Their forms shifted and pulsed with colors that conveyed emotions untranslatable to most species, but the dismissive amber hue that surrounded them whenever humans spoke needed no interpretation. The topic at hand was the proposed expansion of the neutral trade corridor, a shipping lane that would cut through space traditionally controlled by the older galactic powers. It would reduce shipping times by 30% and open new markets for emerging civilizations. The catch was that it passed directly through the Sol system, humanity's backyard. The proposition remains absurd. Zakth's translator crackled with static that somehow managed to convey disdain. To grant a species barely past its first galactic century control over such a vital corridor is beyond reasonable consideration. Humans have demonstrated neither the longevity nor the stability required for such responsibility. Pack leader Grex's growl resonated through the chamber. My people have hunted among the stars for 5,000 years. We have seen civilizations rise and fall like seasons. Humans are still children playing with weapons they barely understand. Last week, one of their ships had to be rescued when its navigation system failed in the Vega sector. Ambassador Garner felt the familiar weight of expectation settling on her shoulders. 3 days of negotiations had followed this same pattern, condescension disguised as concern, superiority wrapped in diplomatic language. She had sat through detailed presentations about human limitations and inexperience. She had listened to statistics about their brief spacefaring history, their technological dependence on other species' innovations, their lack of major military victories against established powers. Coil Speaker Vash's scaled head turned toward the human delegation, his vertical pupils dilating as he focused on Garner. Perhaps the humans could provide reassurance of their competence, some demonstration that they possess the necessary qualifications for such trust. The request hung in the air like a challenge. Around the room, conversations quieted as other delegations turned their attention to the exchange. This was the moment Garner had been preparing for, not just for the 3 days of these negotiations, but for the 3 years since she'd been appointed to this position. She reached into her diplomatic case and withdrew a rectangular package wrapped in simple brown fabric. The material looked ancient, worn smooth by countless handlings, and tied with what appeared to be original hemp rope. The package was roughly the size of an old book, but the way she held it suggested it contained something far more precious than text. High Arbiter Zakth raises a valid point about humanity's brief spacefaring history, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. 317 years is indeed a short time by galactic standards. But before I address our qualifications for managing the corridor, I think it's important to understand what humans were doing before we reached the stars. The Thektai leader's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Your planetary conflicts are well documented, Ambassador. Primitive warfare hardly qualifies as relevant experience for interstellar commerce management. Garner's weathered fingers found the knots in the hemp rope. You're partially correct, High Arbiter. Human conflicts were indeed primitive by your standards. We fought with chemical propellants and metal projectiles while your people were already manipulating gravity fields. We used electromagnetic radiation for communication, while the ethereal collective was sharing consciousness across star systems. She began to untie the first knot, her movements deliberate and unhurried. But there's something to be said for learning hard lessons the hard way, something to be said for earning wisdom through blood and sacrifice rather than inheriting it through technological superiority or extended lifespans. Pack Leader Grex's ears flattened against his skull. Empty words, human. Honor in defeat is still defeat. Your species' tendency towards self-destruction is hardly a recommendation for responsibility. The first knot came free, and Garner moved to the second. You speak of our tendency towards self-destruction, Pack Leader. It's true that humans have fought wars that nearly ended our civilization. But perhaps that's exactly why we understand the true cost of conflict and the true value of peace. Coil Speaker Vash's tongue flicked out, tasting the air. Pretty speech, but words carry no weight here. What evidence do you offer of human worthiness? The second knot yielded to her patient fingers, and she moved to the third and final binding. Evidence, Coil Speaker? I offer you something better than evidence. I offer you truth. The chamber had grown quieter as she worked, conversations dying away as more beings turned to watch. There was something hypnotic about her careful, reverent handling of the package, something that suggested this was more than mere theater. This item, she continued, loosening the final knot, was present at humanity's first true test. Not our first battle, not our first victory, but our first moment of understanding what it means to fight not for conquest, but for survival, not for glory, but for the right to exist. The hemp rope fell away, and she began to unfold the brown fabric. Beneath it was a layer of preservation cloth, and beneath that, something that made several alien species step forward despite themselves. The fabric that emerged was clearly ancient, its colors faded but still visible, deep red stripes alternating with white, a blue field in one corner marked with white symbols. But what made it remarkable wasn't its age or its obvious significance to human culture. It was the condition it was in. The banner was torn in multiple places, with burn marks along the edges. Dark stains, clearly blood, though long since dried, marked several areas. Blast holes, precise and round, punctured the fabric at regular intervals. This wasn't a ceremonial flag kept in a museum. This was something that had seen battle. This banner, Ambassador Garner said, her voice carrying a weight that filled the suddenly silent chamber, flew over Fort McHenry on September 14, 1814, during what humans call the War of 1812. It was bombarded for 25 hours by the British fleet, over 1,800 shells and rockets. The defenders had no way to know if they would survive the night. She held the banner higher, letting the ancient fabric catch the light. The damage was even more apparent now. Scorch marks from explosive shells, tears from shrapnel, stains that could only be blood from the humans who had fought beneath it. When dawn broke and this banner still flew, it became a symbol of something that I think the galactic community has difficulty understanding about humans. We don't just fight to win, we fight to endure. We fight because surrender is not an option, because the cost of defeat is too high to contemplate. High Arbiter Zakth's crystalline form shifted, the light refracting through his body creating new patterns. A primitive conflict between human factions proves nothing about your fitness for... This wasn't a conflict between human factions, Garner interrupted, her voice sharp enough to cut through his translator's static. This was humanity's first war. The silence that followed was profound. Even the environmental systems seemed to quiet, as if the station itself was listening. Impossible, Pack Leader Grex growled, but uncertainty flickered in his yellow eyes. Every species has tribal conflicts, territorial disputes before achieving unity. You're saying humans achieved interplanetary travel after just one war? Ambassador Garner's smile was sharp as winter steel. I'm saying that before 1814, humans had never fought as humans. We fought as tribes, as nations, as religious factions. But that night, under bombardment that should have broken us, we learned something that changed everything. We learned that there are some things worth dying for, and some things worth killing to protect. She moved closer to the center of the room, the torn banner still held aloft. After that night, human conflicts took on a different character. We no longer fought just for territory or resources. We fought for ideas, for freedom, for the right to determine our own destiny. And we learned that when humans fight for something they truly believe in, we don't know how to quit. Coil Speaker Vash's vertical pupils had dilated to thin slits. You speak of one battle as if it changed your entire species. Because it did. Garner's voice carried absolute certainty. Before that night, we were just another planet-bound species squabbling over resources. After that night, we became something else. Something that understood that the only way to truly lose is to stop fighting. The ethereal collective's forms pulsed with colors that shifted from amber dismissal to something approaching concern. Their harmonious voice filled the chamber. You speak of warfare as if it were evolution. For humans, it was. Garner lowered the banner but didn't wrap it away. Every major advance in human civilization came because we refused to accept defeat. When the plague should have ended us, we fought back and created medicine. When starvation should have claimed us, we fought back and revolutionized agriculture. When the atom should have destroyed us, we fought back and reached for the stars. She gestured toward the viewing ports, where the stars hung like scattered diamonds. You see our brief spacefaring history as evidence of inexperience. I see it as evidence of determination. 3 centuries ago, we were throwing metal bullets at each other with chemical explosives. Today, we're negotiating the management of interstellar trade routes. That's not inexperience, that's adaptation at a pace that should terrify anyone paying attention. Pack Leader Grex's claws extended involuntarily, a stress response his species couldn't fully control. You're saying humans are dangerous. I'm saying humans are survivors. Garner's weathered face showed no emotion, and survivors will do whatever it takes to keep surviving. The question you need to ask yourselves isn't whether humans are experienced enough to manage the trade corridor. The question is whether you're prepared to deal with a species that treats impossible as a personal challenge. High Arbiter Zakth's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sound his species made when processing unexpected information. This banner, you claim it's from humanity's first unified conflict, but you carry it with you to diplomatic negotiations. Why? Ambassador Garner began to carefully fold the ancient flag, her movements reverent but matter-of-fact. Because it reminds me, and anyone who sees it, that humans have been fighting impossible odds for a very long time, and we're still here. The chamber remained silent as she secured the banner in its protective wrapping. When she looked up, every alien eye, optical sensor, and energy field was focused on her. The trade corridor passes through Sol system because that's the most efficient route. You can try to go around us, but that adds 6 weeks to shipping times and increases costs by 40%. Or you can work with us and benefit from dealing with a species that spent 3 centuries proving that we don't know how to give up. She returned the wrapped banner to her diplomatic case. The choice, as always, is yours to make. But understand this, whether you work with us or try to work around us, we'll still be here. We'll adapt, we'll overcome, and we'll find a way to not just survive, but thrive, because that's what humans do. The silence stretched on until High Arbiter Zakth's crystalline form shifted, light refracting through him in new patterns. When he spoke, his translator carried a different tone, not the condescending dismissal of before, but something approaching respect. Ambassador Garner, your species' history is instructive, but managing a trade corridor requires more than determination. It requires resources, infrastructure, the ability to maintain security across multiple systems. Garner nodded as if expecting the objection. Valid concerns, High Arbiter. Let me address them systematically. She activated her holographic display, showing detailed schematics of the proposed corridor. Infrastructure. Human shipyards in the Sol system are already producing vessels at 140% of galactic standard efficiency. Our manufacturing processes, refined through centuries of resource scarcity, waste 23% less material than the galactic average. The display shifted to show security projections. As for security, the human defense force may be young by your standards, but it's comprised entirely of volunteers who view defense of the corridor as defense of their home system. Pack Leader Grex, your people understand pack loyalty. Humans defend their territory with similar intensity. Pack Leader Grex's ears had pricked forward, his predator's instincts recognizing something in her tone. What kind of intensity? The kind that turns merchant sailors into improvised warships when pirates attack their convoy. The kind that sees civilian transports ramming hostile vessels to protect evacuation ships. The kind that, she paused, meeting his yellow gaze directly, treats every attack on the corridor as an attack on human space itself. Coil Speaker Vash's scaled head tilted. You would treat commercial raiding asses axis of war. We would treat attacks on ships under our protection as attacks on our allies, Garner corrected. And humans have a very simple policy regarding attacks on our allies. We take it personally. The ethereal collective pulsed with deep purple, confusion mixed with growing concern. This level of investment in the security of others seems excessive. Does it? Garner's expression hardened. 3 days ago, you all questioned our qualifications based on our youth and inexperience. Now you question our commitment. Which is it? Are we too inexperienced to be trusted or too committed to be comfortable with? High Arbiter. Zakth's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Perhaps, Ambassador, both concerns spring from the same source. Your species' apparent inability to do anything halfway. Guilty as charged. Garner's smile was sharp. When humans decide to do something, we do it completely. When we decided to reach the stars, we didn't send a few exploratory probes. We launched a colonization fleet. When we decided to join galactic civilization, we didn't send observers. We sent diplomats with full authority to make binding agreements. She gestured toward her diplomatic case, where the ancient banner lay safely wrapped. And when we decide to protect something, we protect it with everything we have. Not because it's efficient or cost-effective, but because that's who we are. The chamber had grown warmer as the discussion continued, a side effect of the Seth delegation's presence, but also perhaps a reflection of rising tensions. Ambassador Garner seemed unaffected by either the heat or the pressure, her focus absolute. Let me make this simple, she continued. You can grant humans administrative control over the trade corridor and benefit from working with a species that treats every ship passing through as if it were carrying our own children. Or you can attempt to establish the corridor through other routes and deal with the inevitable complications when human merchants start using our more efficient path anyway. Pack leader Grex's claws extended fully now, not in threat, but in what his species displayed when facing a worthy opponent. You're saying humans would ignore the official corridor and create their own. I'm saying humans would use the most efficient route available, regardless of official sanctions, Garner replied calmly. We have a saying, life finds a way. Human commerce is particularly tenacious life. The implications hung in the air like smoke from an old battlefield. An unsanctioned trade route through Sol system would undermine the official corridor, create enforcement nightmares, and potentially destabilize the entire regional economy. High Arbiter Zakh's crystalline form shifted through several color spectrums before settling on a pale blue that indicated deep thought. You present us with an interesting choice, Ambassador. Work with you or work against the inevitable flow of commerce through your system. I present you with reality, Garner corrected. Human merchants are already planning shipping routes through Sol system. Human shipyards are already tooling up for increased traffic. Human defense forces are already positioning assets to protect what they see as their space. The corridor is going to happen. The only question is whether it happens with galactic approval and oversight, or whether it happens despite galactic disapproval. Coil Speaker Vash's tongue flicked out, tasting air that had grown thick with tension. And if we choose to actively prevent human interference with our preferred route? The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees, despite the Seth environmental controls. Ambassador Garner's weathered face showed no expression, but something in her posture suggested a soldier remembering old battles. Coil Speaker, I showed you that banner not as a threat, but as a lesson. Humans learned something under the bombardment of Fort McHenry that has served us well ever since. Sometimes the only way to win is to refuse to lose. She opened her diplomatic case again, not to remove the banner, but to reveal what lay beneath it, a small, unadorned metal container. If you try to prevent human use of the most efficient shipping route through our own system, you won't be negotiating with diplomats anymore. You'll be dealing with the same species that produced this. Her fingers traced the container's surface, soil from Gettysburg, where humans fought the bloodiest battle in their history, not over territory or resources, but over the idea that all humans deserved freedom. Soil from the Somme, where an entire generation died in trenches rather than surrender their principles. Soil from Stalingrad, where humans held a city through winter and starvation because the alternative was extinction. The container seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, giving it an ominous weight that filled the chamber. You're concerned about human inexperience in galactic affairs? This soil has been watered with the blood of humans who died fighting impossible odds, not because they enjoyed war, but because they understood that some things are worth dying for. Pack leader Grex's hackles had risen involuntarily, his predator instincts recognizing a threat display when he saw one. You speak of death as if it were an achievement. I speak of sacrifice as the foundation of human civilization, Garner replied. Every right we enjoy, every freedom we take for granted, every principle we hold sacred was paid for in human blood. We didn't inherit our values from long-lived ancestors or download them from ancient databases. We earned them by deciding that some ideas were worth dying for. The ethereal collective's forms pulsed with deep red, alarm mixed with confusion. This attachment to violent struggle seems unhealthy for a spacefaring species. Does it? Garner's smile was winter cold. 3 centuries ago, humans were confined to one world, fighting each other over scraps of territory. Today, we're spread across 17 systems and growing. Our attachment to violent struggle gave us the strength to reach for the stars instead of accepting planetary limits. She returned the soil container to its place beneath the banner. You want to know what humans will do if you try to block our access to the most efficient trade routes? We'll do what we've always done. We'll find a way. We'll adapt. We'll overcome. And we'll remember who stood in our way. High Arbiter Zakh's mandibles clicked in rapid succession. Are you threatening military action, Ambassador? I'm describing historical patterns. Garner replied evenly. When humans are told something is impossible, we tend to prove otherwise. When we're told we can't do something, we tend to do it anyway. When we're told to know our place, she shrugged, we tend to redefine what our place actually is. The chamber fell silent except for the hum of environmental systems working overtime to accommodate the various species' requirements. The weight of centuries seemed to press down on the assembled delegates as they processed the implications of humanity's brief but intense history. Finally, it was the ethereal collective who broke the silence, their harmonious tones carrying undertones of resigned acceptance. Perhaps there is wisdom in working with such determination rather than against it. Pack leader Grex's ears flattened again, but this time in acknowledgement rather than hostility. The pack that hunts together survives longer than the pack that fights itself. Coil Speaker Vash's vertical pupils had returned to normal dilation. So be it. If the humans are willing to sacrifice for the corridor's protection, perhaps they have earned the right to manage it. High Arbiter Zakth's crystalline form cycled through several colors before settling on pale green, acceptance tinged with respect. Very well, Ambassador Garner. Humanity shall have administrative control over the trade corridor, but understand that with this authority comes responsibility. Any failure, any security breach, any sign that humans cannot handle this trust will be met with the same determination that has carried us from that flag to this negotiating table, Garner finished. High Arbiter, Coil Speaker, Pack Leader, honored members of the ethereal collective, I can promise you only this. Humans will protect the trade corridor as if our survival depends on it, because in our experience, everything always depends on survival. She closed her diplomatic case with a soft click that somehow carried the finality of a closing door. And we're very, very good at surviving. The ancient banner that had flown through bombardment and bloodshed lay safely wrapped in its protective covering, but its message had been delivered. In the silence that followed, each delegation began to understand that they hadn't just negotiated with humanity, they had been introduced to what humanity truly was beneath the diplomatic courtesy and civilized veneer. As the formal agreements were prepared and the various species began to file out of the chamber, Ambassador Garner remained at her position, watching the stars through the viewing ports. Somewhere out there, human merchants were already planning routes through Sol system. Human shipyards were already expanding to handle increased traffic. Human defense forces were already positioning themselves to protect what they now had the authority to protect. The banner had done its job, not just as a symbol of human determination, but as a reminder that some species earned their place in the galaxy not through ancient wisdom or superior technology, but through the simple, implacable refusal to accept defeat. Behind her, the last of the alien delegates exited the chamber, their conversations already turning to the implications of what they had agreed to. They would return to their respective governments with reports that would reshape galactic understanding of humanity's role in the greater community. But for now, Ambassador Garner stood alone with the stars and the weight of history, knowing that the banner she carried would continue to fly, not over a fort under bombardment, but over a species that had learned the hardest lessons of survival and carried them to the stars. In the end, that was perhaps the most human thing of all, taking the lessons of their bloodiest conflicts and using them not to conquer, but to protect, not to dominate, but to endure, not to destroy their enemies, but to earn their respect through the simple, terrifying power of absolute refusal to surrender. The trade corridor would be built. Ships from across the galaxy would pass safely through human space, and they would all fly under the protection of a species that had learned in the longest night of bombardment that some things are worth dying for, and therefore worth living for as well. The stars waited, patient and eternal, for humanity to write the next chapter of their impossible story.